Let's start this edition of the program here in Nigeria, where you must have heard the news. President Buhari blaming the failure of the country's intelligence system for the deadly attack on Kuje prison in Abuja. More than 400 prisoners are still unaccounted for, including more than 60 suspected ISWAP and Boko Haram militants. Just hours before the prison attack, gunmen opened fire on a presidential convoy in the president's home state of Katsina in the northwest. So why, in the face of all this, is Mr. Buhari's government still insisting that security has improved under their tenure? Well, for more on what appears to be deepening insecurity, I'm joined now in the studio by the former spokesman of the Nigerian Army, Brigadier General Sani Usman, he's retired, and by a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Abuja, Dr. Christian Ani. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. I'll start with you, Brigadier General. What are your thoughts on these recent attacks in Nigeria? Do you think they're getting bolder, more audacious?
I think, good evening and thank you for having me on your program. And I think the right word is to say it is getting very, very disturbing and worrisome because every Nigerian is concerned about the wave of insecurity. Even though some of these issues that you've just mentioned were coincidental. Take, for instance, the attack on the presidential advance team to Katsina. You know, given the circumstances under what it happened, and the killing of the area commander in Dusema, you know, that one is entirely a different thing. But for them, you know, the terrorists to have the effrontery to attack a medium security prison at the heart of the federal capital is something that is very disturbing. And given the magnitude of it, more so, is the attack is more or less a kind of a combination of use of both arms and, you know, IEDs, more or less like a kind of a dynamic attack. So it takes a lot of preparation, and you begin to wonder why and what has gone wrong that we have that, you know, attack of such magnitude.
Well, of course, if you're wondering, being someone who's essentially from the inside, imagine how the rest of us feel. I mean, the president himself questioning why the prison defense system, its intelligence, etc., failed to work. Is there an element in your assessment of insider collusion there, or is it something else?
Yeah, I wouldn't conclude that. However, I think we more or less kind of saw this coming. Now, if you look at the geographical location of that correctional facility, it has been encroached upon. The world standard is that such facilities should be isolated with clear sight of view so that you can be able to see who is coming at any given time of the day or night. But this time around, it's meshed up with the society, so you hardly question anybody because it's next door to so many other, you know, residential things. But apart from that also, we have neglected a lot of things. Take, for instance, when the attack was going on, an international radio station had a kind of live program with an inmate who was having a telephone handset with him. So invariably, almost each of those, either on, you know, awaiting trial, those who have been sentenced, or those who are kept there for whatever reason, they are more or less having access to some of these things that have been, you know, they communicate with the outside world. And it is no secret that several instances of criminal breaches were planned within the four walls of the prison facility. So you see, it's accumulation of so many things that had happened. And sadly also, the Department of Security Services, they are doing marvelous job in tracking some of the phone calls. There were instances they track phone calls to the four walls of the correctional facilities. That will tell you something. And not quite a long time, about a fortnight ago, they carried out a kind of cordon and such. You can imagine the number of Android and iOS phones that were discovered, you know, from the inmates of that facility. What has happened? Who was sanctioned? You know, so many questions. And apart from the fact that this is 21st century, by looking at that correctional facility, what are those technological things that are in place to ensure more so you have high profile, you know, detainees or convicts in that facility? You know, how do you up your game? And especially those who are, you know, accused of violent extremism, you know, the terrorists and what have you. Do you have the number, or do you have the, you know, specialized people to see how best they can de-radicalize them? Or it is the other way around, they will even gain more converts, I mean, you know, converts within the system. So many questions and answers that would have given you an insight that actually distance, we saw it coming. But the most important thing now that it's happened, what are we doing about it?
Right. We've got about, very interesting, and we're going to come back to you in a minute. Dr. Christian Ani, we've got just over a minute. I apologize for that, but we're very interested in his analysis. One of the newspapers, the Daily Trust, suggested that the DSS had intelligence of a pending attack and had passed it on to the correctional service. But is it enough for the DSS just to pass it on to the correctional facility, or should they have mobilized all the services to ensure that this is prevented?
I think you're very right in that maybe just to link it a little bit to the issue of proactive governance. I think this all leads to proactive governance. Intelligence services, as the spokesperson, former spokesperson has highlighted, have been doing a lot in trying to gather intelligence, and this intelligence are there. But then the actual issue that we have is, do we act upon those intelligence reports? And how proactive do we have in terms of our security apparatus responding on time to security threats? This is a clear issue of lack of, let me not say lack of governance, but then lack of proactive governance. Is more or less like reactive. Right. When issues happen, then before we get to...
So there's an element of that in this sort of problem that's developed. Yes. Okay, please stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, you may have heard that hundreds of prisoners are still on the run in Nigeria after an audacious attack on a jail in the capital, Abuja, by Islamist militants. And now there are warnings of a possible increase in crime around Abuja, with many of the escaped prisoners, including some militant fighters, said to likely still be in and around the city. And as if that jailbreak wasn't brazen enough, this week Nigeria was rocked by a bold attack at the very heart of the country's leadership, the presidential security team in Katsina State, President Buhari's own home state. As Nigeria roils in the turbulence of a deepening security crisis, we ask, is there any prospect of all this insecurity reducing anytime soon, or is it likely to intensify as elections approach? Well, for more on this, I'm joined once again in the studio by the former spokesman of the Nigerian Army, Brigadier General Sani Usman, retired, and by a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Abuja, Dr. Christian Ani. And I'm also delighted to say that we're joined by the leading political analyst and senior fellow of the respected think tank, the Center for Democracy and Development, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. And let me come straight away to you, Professor, because I'm sure you've heard about all that is going on in Abuja here. The big concern at the moment is warnings of a possible increase in crime around Abuja as a result of the attack on Kuje prison, with many of the escaped prisoners said to likely still be in around the capital. And how much does that pose a dangerous threat, do you think, in your assessment?
It's actually a good development, isn't it? Because for so long, a lot of the banditry that has been going on, the killings have been in rural areas, in places that are not directly in the news. And Nigeria's ruling class has been very comfortable that in Abuja, they are not being slaughtered on the streets and in their homes as they are being slaughtered in other parts of the country. So maybe now that the reality is hitting home where the ruling class lives, they may begin to realize what other Nigerians have realized for a very long time, that there is no safety in this country, that security agencies are not doing their work, and that ultimately the only way to protect yourself in this country is to purchase your own guns and try to defend yourself against people who have better firepower, better training, and better networks than you have. It's not a nice situation.
Well, absolutely. Stay with us, Professor Ibrahim. Let me come to you, Brigadier General Sani Usman. What do you reckon about what he said? He was suggesting that you probably need to arm people, and because, I mean, obviously they are not protected otherwise.
I think I quite agree with him that the point is hitting home. And it is not just even in Abuja. It may interest you to know, in some of the state capitals, the bandits and kidnappers have totally exhausted the villages and the rural areas. They no longer have the means to pay for ransom, so they have resigned to their fate. And they are desperate also to get more logistics and more funds, so they are gradually moving towards the cities in various states, especially in the northwestern part of the country. So automatically, this is a very disturbing thing, but that notwithstanding, I think the good thing about it is that I think it is now a good opportunity for us to have a rethink about our security in this country. And I know that the solution is right in front of us. It lies at the heart of good governance in this country. You know, people should be held accountable, and they should be alive to their responsibilities, and they should be seen to be doing what they are supposed to do. And if there is any infraction, there be sanctions.
Yeah, but give us an insider's look. I mean, because you're a brigadier general, retired. I mean, that's a pretty high position to get to in the army. You were the spokesman of the army, which meant that you were in touch with all the different branches of the military. I mean, what is it that is going so fundamentally wrong? I know you mentioned good governance, but I mean, give us some insight into why things, because this has been going on for a long time, even when you were army spokesman.
What I want you to understand, there is this misconception about the whole concept of security and how to go about dealing with security situation. To a large extent, the military are always in the front, forefront of security, mitigating security challenges, and some of them shouldn't have been so. Because especially if you look at the menace of terrorism and insurgency, if you are putting it on 100%, the military's effort is just between 35 to 40%. So who does the 60%? So, and that is where the issue of good governance and comprehensive approach come into play. Take, for instance, we have 3 tiers of government in this country. Only 2 are working. The local government system is virtually collapsed. And that is why when you are talking about, even when the state was making, security, new policies on security directive, no mention was made of a local government. Rather, they have the Emirates and all the rest of it. So unless we go back to the basis and critically evaluate our policing system, then we will still be experiencing this kind of security challenges we're having.
Okay.
So,
I mean, let me bring you in, Dr. Christian Annie, because you study these things. I mean, you're the more sort of academic side of this discussion. Does this underscore the problem here, that all the different security agencies tend to work in their own sphere rather than working together? In other words, there is no coordination between the different arms of the security services. Because, I mean, we were talking at the outset with the Brigadier General about the fact that the DSS had intelligence of a pending attack and then passed it on to the correctional services. But you would have thought that they'd all get together and try and arrest this problem.
Yes, that is very key. But just to also give a context, that one of the things that we don't really focus on is the dynamics, or let's say the dynamic that goes in within these terrorist organizations, and whether it's bandits or unknown gunmen, but to understand like what is really happening within this sphere. ISWAP has been preparing over the years since it broke off from Shekau's faction since 2016, has been preparing for this kind of comeback for a more proactive violent extremist action. It stopped significant attacks on civilians in the northern part of countries where it wants to gain support from civilians. And it's concentrated more on attack on military targets, on all the government targets that it could weigh in on. And, you know, we tend to ask then, has the government then kind of done a thorough analysis of how these organizations operate, how they cooperate with each other. For instance, ISWAP cooperates with Ansaru government, Ansaru extremism, and then various other terrorist organizations around the region. What is the relationship between the terrorist element in the Lake Chad Basin and that of the Sahel region? And what is the connections between the arms trafficking elements?
So basically transnational, yes, and that's one of your areas of expertise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me bring you in, Professor Ibrahim. Thank you very much indeed for your patience. What does all this tell us in terms of assessment of President Buhari's record on security? I mean, is it worse now than it was before? Because, I mean, they're saying that, that things are not as bad as people are making it out to be.
Well, I guess as president who has responsibility for national security, it's a difficult situation, and he'll say that, wouldn't he? But the fact of the matter is that everybody is aware that in the past 7 years, there has been significant decline of security all over the country. And violent extremism, militancy, banditry, kidnapping has spread all over the country. And that the government has shown an incapacity to address the issues. The principal approach of the president has always been, every week there's such an attack, he will direct the security agencies to deal with the attackers. If he has to say that every week and the situation doesn't change at all, then it means he has no control over what is going on, and therefore what he says has very little value. The crisis we're in this country today is very serious, because any state that cannot provide safety for citizens, and where people procure arms, and we understand at least 6 million Nigerians today have procured arms and are using it, and that therefore are able to not just attack unarmed civilians, but attack armed forces of this country, the police and other security agencies. It means the state is losing control over that territory, and that the new sheriff in town is the bandit next door, not the president.
That's a very good point. And let me bring you in, Brigadier General Sani Usman, because, I mean, Senator Shehu Sani was pointing out on his Twitter page that it is rather perverse that the government has spent trillions of naira acquiring new fighter jets and attack helicopters, you know, and all the rest of it, all this sophisticated equipment, and yet the country is apparently at the mercy of a roving gang of militants on motorcycles.
Well, that's a mistake actually people make. You know, you have a serious security challenge, and you describe it as you know, terms that are, you know, negating the seriousness of the issue. First and foremost, yes, given the security challenges, so much has been expended thus far. But what I want you to understand is the fact that now the level of the security challenges vis-a-vis the budgetary allocation given the subheads, to what extent that is commensurate enough. That is one. Secondly, yes, and I like what Professor has just said. The issue, whenever you expect anything, you must inspect. That means you have to follow. There should be a kind of monitoring and evaluation mechanism and timelines given, especially when issues of this nature have happened. So invariably, it's a kind of dicey situation whereby you seemingly have expended so much, but given the security challenges, when you put it on the plate, it does, I mean, it is completely insignificant. And I will tell you why. Take, for instance, between 1999 to date, to what extent have we invested in our security system? When I'm talking about security, let's even start with the policing system. how much have you expended in terms of recruiting, increasing the human resource of the police? How much have we expended in the equipment, holding of the police, and the logistics?
Right. Is that what you would do then, Brigadier General, if you were made Minister of Defense or put in charge of security in Nigeria? Is that what you would do? Beef up the police, beef up the army with equipment, and all the rest of it? I mean, obviously, that's going to take time.
What I want you to understand is that security is a collective responsibility. And naturally, when you have such problems of that magnitude, I made reference to, putting it on a 100% scale. What are those 60% efforts, and who is supposed to do it? So it is not just the issue of the policing system alone. At the heart of all the security challenges we are having, I made reference to it earlier on, is the issue of good governance. And I talked about the local government system, but beyond the local government system, to what extent have you provided enabling environment for an average Nigerian to actualize his legitimate aspiration as a citizen of this country? So these are the issues. The local government system is not working, and we know that 60%, 65% of the total population of this country are youth. To what extent have you integrated the youth into this? Look, just recently, there were security reports and getting worrisome. Yes, every Nigerian has a freedom of movement, freedom of so many things. But there was general influx of youth, particularly from the rural areas towards the federal capital. Where are they going to? What is the motive? Is it because they are looking for greener pasture? Or is it that the criminal elements are trying to converge to, commit some acts of atrocities? These are the issues. So beyond that, again, is the issue of synergy of effort to ensure, beyond provision of information, who make use of that information, and what is the degree of success, in terms of, and what is the capacity of those responding agency or that utilize the intelligence, to respond to security situations.
Well, on that note, we're going to be talking about this, I'm sure, for many, many more months to come, particularly as the elections draw near. I want to thank you very much indeed, Brigadier General Sani Usman, who was a former spokesman for the Army, and Dr. Christian Ani, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies.